Imagine organizing the perfect marriage proposal and getting down on one knee in front of the wrong person. Eduardo, a meticulous millionaire, saw his plan to ask for his girlfriend's hand turn into a complete disaster when he put the ring on the finger of another woman, his co-worker. But was this error just a coincidence, or was fate trying to say something? As he tries to fix the chaos and win back his angry fiancée, Eduardo begins to question everything, his choices, his feelings, and even who should really be by his side. A mess full of exciting twists, funny moments, and surprising discoveries that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Don't blink, because you won't want to miss a second of this story. Eduardo was restless. The restaurant was already full. Friends and family were eagerly awaiting the big moment, and he could barely breathe under the weight of expectation. As he checked the ring in his pocket for the fourth time, his friend Bruno approached with a mischievous smile. "It's going to be okay, man, just don't do anything stupid," Bruno said, poking him on the shoulder. "You're not helping," Eduardo muttered, adjusting his tie. "What if I forget what I was going to say? Or worse, if she says no?" Bruno laughed, clearly taking advantage of his friend's tension. "If she says no, at least you can use the ring as a keychain. Think on the positive side." "Thank you for your trust, Bruno. Really encouraging," Eduardo replied, rolling his eyes. He straightened his tie once more and took a deep breath. The restaurant was impeccable, decorated with white flowers and twinkling lights, as Eduardo had planned down to the smallest detail. The central table was full of familiar faces, including Isabella, who looked stunning in an elegant red dress. However, something started to bother him. Camila, his co-worker, wore a dress very similar to Isabella's. "Excellent. It's just what I was missing," he whispered to himself. But he pushed the thought away. Nothing could go wrong, right? After dinner was served, Eduardo barely touched the food. His eyes were fixed on the ring in his pocket and on Isabella's face. Finally, he stood up, cleared his throat, and got everyone's attention. "Excuse me, everyone. I have something important to say." Isabella smiled, slightly surprised, while all eyes turned to Eduardo. He walked over to where she was sitting, but with his hands shaking and his nerves frayed, he ended up kneeling in front of the wrong person. "Isabella, you are the love of my life. From the day I met you, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you agree to marry me?" Camilla remained static, blinking several times before opening her mouth. She looked around, hoping someone would say it was a joke. "Eduardo, you know I'm Camilla, right?" A murmur of shock ran through the room. Isabella stood up suddenly, with an expression that mixed anger and disbelief. "Are you kidding me, Eduardo?" Eduardo, still kneeling, looked at Camilla, then at Isabella, and realized his mistake. "I am not. That was a mistake. Isabella, I meant you. Of course I meant you." Camilla stepped back, holding the ring in one hand. "Well, that turned out interesting." Isabella shook her head, grabbed her bag, and left quickly. Eduardo got up awkwardly and ran after her. "Isabella, wait, please let me explain." However, before he could leave the room, Bruno intercepted him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Congratulations, my friend. I think we just witnessed the worst marriage proposal in history." "It doesn't help, Bruno," Eduardo exclaimed, pushing his friend's hand away and running out the door. While Eduardo tried to reach Isabella, the room was in an uproar. Camilla stood still for a moment, still holding the ring. Finally, she looked around, sighed, and said with a mirthless smile, "That wasn't in my plan for the evening." Eduardo caught up with Isabella in the restaurant parking lot. She was leaning against her car, arms crossed and an expression of pure disgust. "You really don't know what you're doing, do you?" she said, without even looking at him directly. "Isabella, it was a mistake, I swear. I was nervous, and Camilla's dress is so similar to yours that—" "Like? Eduardo, do you think this is it? That the problem is the dress?" she interrupted, her voice raised. "You can't even recognize the woman you want to propose to." Eduardo opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. He knew nothing he said would sound convincing enough at that moment. "I need some time. Don't look for me, Eduardo. And please reflect on what you really want, because it's clearly not me," concluded Isabella, getting into the car and driving away, leaving it parked in the parking lot. Back at the restaurant, Eduardo found Camilla still holding the ring. She looked at him with a mixture of confusion and humor. "So, that was fun. I hope you have a brilliant plan to save your ass," she said, handing back the ring. "Bright? Camilla, I think I just ruined my relationship," he replied, sighing and taking the ring from her hands. "Well, at least now we know you're terrible at proposals," she joked, trying to lighten the mood. "But seriously, do you want me to do something? Maybe call Isabella and explain that it was a misunderstanding?" "No, Camilla. If I can't fix this alone, no one can," said Eduardo, discouraged. The next day, Eduardo tried to call Isabella several times, but she didn't answer. He decided to focus on work, but the situation didn't help. Meanwhile, Camilla appeared in her living room carrying 2 coffees. "Look, I thought you could use some caffeine, or a distraction at least," she said, placing the coffee on the table. "Thanks. I need all this and a miracle," he replied, accepting the coffee. Camilla sat down, crossing her legs. "So what's the plan?" "The plan? I think I'm starting to realize that I have no idea how to solve this," admitted Eduardo. Camilla gave a slight smile. "Maybe you should start by asking yourself why you are so desperate to resolve this." "What do you mean?" he asked, frowning. "I mean, you seem to be more concerned about the mistake than what led to this moment." "Are you sure you are doing this for the right reasons?" she asked. Eduardo remained silent, reflecting on her words. Maybe Camilla was right. Maybe the problem was bigger than just a mistake at a dinner party. Eduardo met with Bruno to vent. They were in a cafe in the city centre, and Eduardo looked more lost than ever. "So, let's recap," Bruno began, stirring the sugar in his coffee. "You proposed to the wrong woman. Your girlfriend is furious, and now you're here thinking coffee with a friend will solve everything." "I didn't think it would solve it," Eduardo replied, rolling his eyes. "I just need to understand how I got to this point." Bruno gave a short laugh. "Well, maybe the fact that you can't tell your girlfriend from a co-worker is a clue." "It doesn't help, Bruno." "Okay, seriously now." Bruno leaned forward, looking Eduardo directly in the eyes. "Why were you so nervous, man? You've been dating Isabella for years. This should be natural, not a military operation." "I don't know," Eduardo admitted, shaking his head. "I think I was more worried about making everything look perfect than actually being present." Bruno took a sip of his coffee before responding. "Maybe the mistake with Camilla wasn't a simple mistake. Have you ever thought that it could be your subconscious telling you something?" "My subconscious?" asked Eduardo, frowning. "Yeah, like, maybe you're not as sure about Isabella as you think. Or maybe Camilla has more meaning than you've realized so far," Bruno suggested provocatively. Eduardo snorted. "Camilla's just a co-worker. That doesn't make any sense. So why are you feeling so comfortable around her lately? And don't lie, because I know you've been talking to her more," said Bruno, raising his eyebrows. Eduardo was silent. Bruno's words bothered him more than he wanted to admit. At work, interactions with Camilla continued. During lunch, the two ended up laughing together about an incident involving the coffee machine. For the first time in days, Eduardo felt relaxed. "Did you know that the coffee machine is more efficient at causing disasters than most people?" joked Camilla, cleaning a coffee stain on her shirt. "Well, at least I'm not alone in my ability to screw up," Eduardo replied, laughing. As the day went on, Eduardo began to notice something. Camilla wasn't just a distraction. Talking to her was easy, natural. different from the constant effort that seemed necessary with Isabella. Eduardo finally managed to arrange a meeting with Isabella for a frank conversation. They met in a quiet park, away from prying eyes. Eduardo was nervous, holding his hands to try to contain his sweat. He knew he needed to be honest, but the pressure was immense. "Thank you for coming, Isabella. I know I don't deserve it after what happened," began Eduardo, trying to break the ice. "I only came because I need answers, Eduardo," she replied, crossing her arms. His stern look made it clear that it wouldn't be easy to convince her. "How can you get something so basic wrong? How can you confuse your girlfriend with another woman?" "It was a mistake, Isabella. I was nervous, distracted. It was a moment of confusion. None of this changes how I feel about you." "Distracted," replied Isabella, raising her tone. "We've been together for years. How can you be distracted when it comes to asking me to marry you?" Eduardo took a deep breath. "I knew that any excuse would only make things worse. You are right. I failed. But honestly, I think the problem goes beyond that. I wanted everything to be perfect, but I was more worried about impressing others than connecting with you." Isabella remained silent, analyzing his every word. Finally, she replied, "And that's the problem, Eduardo. Our relationship stopped being about us a long time ago. It seems like we're just keeping up a facade. We got lost." "I don't want it to end like this," he said, feeling the weight of her words. "But maybe I need to finish it," Isabella replied, shaking her head. "Be honest with yourself. Do you really still see me as your partner, or just something you have to keep out of habit? Because I feel more like an item on your to-do list than someone important to you." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Eduardo knew she was right, but admitting it was painful. He didn't want to lose Isabella, but he also couldn't ignore that something had been wrong between them for a long time. After the meeting, Eduardo spent the day reflecting. He knew he needed to be honest with himself, even if it meant admitting things he'd rather ignore. Meanwhile, his interactions with Camilla continued to be a constant. During a break at work, Camilla appeared in her office with 2 coffees. She looked at him with a playful smile. "How is the plan to get your soon-to-be ex-fiancé back going?" she asked. Eduardo laughed, although there was a touch of melancholy in his expression. "I don't think there is a plan anymore. There is only acceptance." Camilla placed the coffee on the table and sat down. "You know, Eduardo, sometimes life gets easier when we stop trying to plan everything. Maybe it's time you started feeling more and thinking less." He looked at her, surprised by the seriousness in Camilla's voice. For a moment, Eduardo noticed something he hadn't noticed before. Talking to her was easy, effortless. Camilla seemed to understand what he was going through better than he did, and for the first time, Eduardo wondered if what he felt for her was more than simple friendship. The following days were decisive for Eduardo. He finally admitted to himself that his relationship with Isabella was no longer what it was before. Even though he loved her, he couldn't ignore what he was feeling. Deep down, he knew he needed to be honest with her and, most importantly, with himself. Eduardo arranged a new meeting with Isabella, this time in a quiet cafe. She arrived punctually, keeping a neutral expression as if she already knew what was coming. "Thanks for coming again," he said, as he pulled out the chair for her to sit down. "I hope this time you know exactly what you want to say," Isabella replied, bluntly. Eduardo took a deep breath, seeking courage. "I thought a lot about us, about what happened, and I realized that maybe the mess at dinner was a reflection of what was wrong between us." "What do you mean?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "In recent months, our relationship has become more about fulfilling expectations than about how we feel about each other," he admitted. "And that's my fault too. I was so focused on impressing others that I forgot the most important thing, both of us." Isabella shook her head, sighing. "I feel that way too. As much as it hurts to admit it, Eduardo, I think we are forcing ourselves into something that no longer makes sense." You're right. And I want you to be happy, even if it means we go our separate ways." There was a long silence between them. Finally, Isabella smiled, a sad smile but full of acceptance. "Thank you for being honest. And as strange as it may seem, I also think this is what's best for us." Eduardo felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Although it was painful, he knew it was the right decision. Days later, Eduardo found Camilla at work. He hesitated for a moment but decided it was time to be honest with her too. "Camilla, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Of course. Don't tell me you confuse someone again," she joked, laughing. "This time, I'm sure of what I want to say," he replied, smiling. "I realized something in the last few days. Something that, perhaps, I didn't want to admit before." Camilla raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what is it?" "That talking to you, being by your side, has been what makes me feel most comfortable lately. And I don't know where that might take us, but I'd like to find out." Camilla was silent for a few seconds, then responded with a smile. "You know that's the weirdest request I've ever received, right?" "Absolutely, but I hope you consider it," he said, trying to contain his nervousness. "I consider it, Eduardo. But let's take it easy, okay? One thing at a time." Eduardo nodded, relieved. "That's all I want." The two began to spend more time together, exploring what they felt, without rushing. Meanwhile, Isabella found her own path, using the time to rediscover herself. She realized that the breakup was a new beginning for her, too. Months later, Eduardo and Camilla decided to work together on a social project for couples in crisis, inspired by the lessons they learned. During the opening event, Camilla joked, "Maybe our first success story will be that you don't make the wrong person next time." Eduardo laughed, holding her hand. "I promise I will never make that mistake again."